where the water remembers. Nora had a system for storms. She kept a go bag by the door, not the emergency kit that FEMA recommended with its bottled water and solar radio, but her own version, refined over 9 years. Waterproof case with 3 camera bodies, extra batteries sorted by charge level and labeled Ziploc bags, her field notebook in the left outer pocket where she could reach it without looking, and 1 protein bar she always forgot to eat. The bag weighed 22 pounds. She knew because she weighed it every time she packed it, a habit she had developed in the early years when she was still learning that the difference between a good storm chase and a disaster was preparation that didn't feel like preparation. She had not always been careful. That was the thing about her she did not discuss. She was sitting in the parking lot of a gas station outside Harrowfield at 4:17 in the morning, watching the weather radar on her laptop balanced on the steering wheel when the system changed course. Not by much, 8 degrees north, but 8 degrees was the difference between the storm hitting open farmland and the storm hitting the Velacourt Valley, where the old estates were, where the drainage was wrong, where the roads flooded in sequence like dominoes, the lowest points going first, then the bridges, then the stretches with no shoulder to pull onto. She had driven those roads 3 times before. She knew their order. Nora closed the laptop, ate the protein bar, and drove north. She was 31 years old, and she chased storms for a meteorological research institute that paid her a salary that was technically adequate and practically insufficient for the equipment she needed. She funded the gap herself, which was why she also sold photographs. Not the scientific data, the images. The ones that looked like the world was ending and also, somehow, like it was only beginning. She had a following she did not particularly cultivate and did not understand, and every few months an editor would contact her about a book and she would respond politely and then not follow up, because a book implied a narrative, and she did not have a narrative. She had a before and an after. The gap between them was not a narrative. It was a weather event that had lasted 3 years. Her younger sister Petra had died in a flood. Not a dramatic flood, not the cinematic kind with walls of water and people clinging to rooftops. A road that had looked passable and wasn't. A car that had stalled in 18 inches of moving water because Petra had not known that 18 inches was enough. Nora had known. Nora had been 40 miles away, chasing a different storm. Nora had told Petra once, years before, that you never drove through standing water if you couldn't see the road surface, and Petra had said yes. Yes, I know, in the way she said yes to everything Nora told her, absorbing it without weight. The water had weighed 800 pounds per cubic foot. The car door had weighed enough. Nora did not blame herself. That was what she told her therapist, and it was true in the way that things were true when you had worked very hard to make them true. The working was the evidence of something, but she had decided not to examine what. What she did instead was drive towards storms. Measure them. Photograph them. Understand them with the precision of someone who believed that if you knew a thing completely enough, it could not hurt you again. This was not a healthy belief. She was aware of that. The rain started before she reached Harrowfield's northern edge, the kind of rain that didn't build. It was simply there, fully formed, as if the sky had decided to stop pretending. Her wipers moved at their highest setting, and still the windshield was more water than glass. She slowed to 15 miles an hour and watched the ditches on both sides of the road fill, with the disinterest of something that had been filling ditches for centuries and found nothing remarkable about it. The Velacourt Valley came up in her headlights as a darkness below the road, the land dropping away on both sides, the old estate walls visible as pale vertical lines in the rain. She had looked up the estates once when she was preparing a presentation on historical flooding patterns in the region. Most of them were empty or converted. One, the largest, furthest back from the road, set on a slight elevation above the rest of the valley, had no record of sale, no planning applications, no registered owner in any database she could find. The kind of absence that usually meant private trusts and old money, and people who understood that the best way to be left alone was to make yourself difficult to find. She noted the absence without particular interest and moved on. The road flooded at the third bridge, as she had expected. Not impassably. She could see the surface, barely, a gray shine under gray water, but enough that she pulled onto the verge and got out to check depth before crossing. The rain hit her with the specific force of rain at this intensity, not quite painful, but insistent in the way of something that intended to get through whatever you were wearing. She pulled on her waterproof, already soaked down to her second layer, and walked to the bridge. The water was moving. Fast enough. She stood there for a moment, in the rain, doing the calculation she always did: depth, speed, vehicle weight, probability, and the calculation came out the same way it always came out when the water was moving and she couldn't see the bottom. She turned back. This was the discipline she had built. Not heroism, not instinct, a protocol. You did not cross moving water if you couldn't confirm the bottom. You pulled back. You found another way, or you waited. The storm would come to you eventually. The data would still be there. You did not drive through the thing that took your sister because you wanted a photograph. She was back at her car, pulling out her phone to reroute, when the light came from the hill. Not steady, intermittent, the way light looked through trees in a storm, something moving behind the cover of a very large building. She stood in the rain and looked at it for a moment. The elevation was right. The building was the one with no registered owner. Her phone said the nearest accessible road to that property from this direction was 6 miles north. The storm system was moving southeast at 31 miles per hour. In 40 minutes, the worst of it would be directly overhead, and visibility would drop to approximately nothing. She looked at the light on the hill. She looked at the flooded bridge. She had excellent waterproof boots. The manor was larger than it looked from the road, which meant it was very large indeed, because from the road it had looked like a small country. She came at it from the south field, where the ground was sodden but not submerged, following the line of a stone wall that gave her something to navigate by when the lightning was between her and the main structure. The wall was old, dry stone, no mortar, the kind of construction that held together by weight and habit rather than any binding agent. She appreciated this about it. She had always found things that held together by weight and habit more trustworthy than things held together by intention. The front of the manor was dark. The light she had seen was at the side. One window, ground floor, warm and yellow and utterly incongruous with the storm and the empty approach, and the fact that every other window in the structure was black. She went to the front door anyway, not because she expected anyone to answer. She expected nothing, had learned to expect nothing as a baseline, but because knocking at the front door was what you did. You announced yourself. You gave the space the chance to respond on its own terms before you started making decisions about it. She knocked 3 times. Hard. Nothing. The rain made everything else noise. She went around the side. The window with the light was in a room that appeared to be, from the outside, a library or study. She could see bookshelves through the rain-blurred glass, and the edge of a desk, and a lamp. What she could not see was a person, though the lamp was clearly on, and clearly the kind of lamp someone had turned on, rather than left on. She knocked on the glass. The movement was immediate, and she was not prepared for it. Something in the room went still in the specific way that things went still when they had been moving, and then made a decision to stop. She had seen this in animals, a deer processing information, a rabbit calculating, and she had never seen it in a person. Then a figure separated from the shadows near the far wall and moved toward the window, and she saw it was a man. And she revised her assessment of the room's dimensions. because he was taller than the bookshelf arrangement had suggested was possible. He looked at her through the glass. She looked back at him. He had the kind of face that stopped you before you could make a decision about it. Not beautiful exactly, but precise. As if someone had made a very specific set of choices about each feature and then declined to soften any of them. His hair was dark, and his eyes were something she couldn't determine through rain-streaked glass, and his expression was the expression of someone who had not expected to be looked at tonight and was working out how to feel about it. She held up her phone, showing the radar image on the screen. She pointed at the flooded road behind her. She pointed at the manor. The universal language of I am trapped, and you have a roof. He looked at the phone. He looked at her. Then he moved toward what she assumed was the interior door. She went back around to the front. The door opened before she knocked again. He was called Aldrich. He told her this the way people told you their name when they were not accustomed to being asked, flatly, with the slight hesitation of someone checking that the words still applied to them. She told him her name, and he repeated it once, quietly, as if filing it somewhere. The entrance hall was cold, not the cold of a house that had lost power, the cold of a house that had not been warm in some time, in which warmth was a visiting condition rather than a resident one. Her boots left water on the flagstone floor. She did not apologize for this. The floor had been receiving water from this landscape for what appeared to be several centuries, and one more storm was not going to change its relationship with the condition. The bridge at the south crossing, she said. Is there another way out of the valley? Not until the water drops. His voice had something wrong with it that she couldn't identify immediately. A cadence issue, like a musician playing in an unfamiliar key. He pronounced certain syllables with a precision that modern English had largely abandoned. The North Road floods later but faster. You'd have an hour, possibly, before both are impassable. How long has the South Bridge been flooded? Since approximately 2 in the morning. She checked her phone. It was 4:52. You've been watching. I watch the water when it rains. He said it without particular emphasis, as if this were the most ordinary thing. I have been doing it for some time. She pulled out her field notebook. Old habit, she noted times and observations whether or not she was formally on a data collection mission, because you never knew what would be relevant later, and because writing things down was the closest she came to faith. She wrote, South Bridge impassable 0200, North Road expected 12 HRs, Manor, Velicourt Estate, occupant present. He watched her write. You're measuring, he said. I'm a meteorologist. I measure. In the middle of the night, in this storm. Especially in this storm. She looked up. The system shifted course about 40 minutes ago. I was already in the valley approach when it happened. This, she gestured at the window, at the rain visible even through the thick old glass, moving nearly horizontally now. This is the front edge of something that hasn't happened in this valley in approximately 40 years. The last comparable event was 1987. Before that, 1962. She paused. I have been trying to get data on this valley's flood pattern for 3 years. The drainage topology is unusual. The water behaves differently here than the models predict. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the adjustment of someone who has heard something true said in a new way. It does, he said. The water here does not follow the rules. She looked at him. The lamp from the study threw light into the entrance hall at an angle that did not fully reach him. She could see him, but not the way she could see a person in a lit room. He existed at the edge of the light, and she could not tell if this was architectural accident or preference. Does it flood the manor? Not this floor. The cellars. A pause. The cellars have flooded since before I can remember. She thought about the phrasing. Before I can remember was a strange way to describe the history of a building you occupied. It implied either that you had been here so long the beginning had become inaccessible, or that you had inherited someone else's memory of the place. neither quite fit the way he'd said it. She did not ask. She had a protocol for that too. You gathered data before you drew conclusions. You did not collapse the waveform before you had enough observations. Is there somewhere dry I can set up equipment? She asked. He looked at her for a moment, the focused, organizing look she was beginning to recognize as his version of processing. The study, he said. It has the best window. His name was not Aldrich. Or rather, Aldrich was the name he used now, had used for 40 years, which was long enough that it had become the name in his own mind. His actual name, the one given to him in a different century in a different language, he used approximately never. He had been in the Manor for 11 years this time. Before that, he had been elsewhere for 30, and before that, here again for 60, and the pattern went back further than it was useful to trace. The Manor knew him. The land knew him in the way land knew things that returned to it, not warmly, not with welcome, but with the flat acknowledgement of a thing that persisted. He had been alone in it tonight, because he was always alone in it. His second, a man called Prest who handled the practical matters, the accounts, the occasional necessary human interaction, was in London on business that Aldrich had been postponing dealing with for months. The business was not good. It had to do with the conclave, and with a decision the conclave had made in his absence, and with the consequences of that decision for the properties and the agreements and the carefully constructed distance he maintained between his kind's politics and himself. He had been avoiding Prest's calls for 3 weeks. He had been doing this in the specific and practiced way of someone who had learned that bad news, deferred long enough, sometimes resolved itself. This was not a good strategy, and he knew it, and he continued to do it, because the alternative was engaging with the conclave, and the conclave was a collection of beings who had been alive too long to have perspectives and not long enough to have wisdom, and every conversation with them cost him something he could not name and did not get back. He had been watching the water when she appeared at his window. He watched the water during storms, because the water in this valley was the thing he understood best, its patterns, its deceptions, the way it moved through the landscape with the confidence of something that knew it would eventually have everything. He had watched it take the lower farms in 1823. He had watched it take the bridge in 1962 and again in 1987. He had watched it over centuries take and return and take again, and he found in this a consistency that he did not find in anything else. The woman at his window had been holding a phone with a radar image on it, and pointing at the road with the calm of someone communicating across a language barrier, and he had felt something move in his chest that he had not felt in some time. Not desire, not yet, and not exactly, but the specific alertness of someone who has become accustomed to a particular quality of silence and has just heard a new sound within it. She sat in his study now with 2 cameras on the desk beside her laptop and a notebook open to a fresh page, and she was watching the storm through the window with an attention that matched his. The same quality of it, the willingness to simply watch without needing the thing to perform. He brought her tea because he had maintained the habit for 150 years as a form of social infrastructure, and she accepted it without surprise and drank it without looking away from the window. The drainage runs northeast, she said after a while, but the water pools southwest, in the lower field. That's backwards. There's a fault under the valley floor, he said. Old. The water finds it. She turned to look at him. How do you know about the fault? I have been watching this valley flood for a long time. She looked at him for a moment, the assessing look she gave him sometimes, that had the quality of a measurement being taken. How long? He considered how to answer this. There were answers that were technically accurate, and answers that were useful, and the overlap between the two was not always large. Long enough, he said, that I have records of floods that your historical data probably doesn't. Her pen was already moving. You have records. In the cellar. Among other things. He paused. If the water permits access, I could show you. She looked back at the window. The storm was at its height, the glass vibrating faintly with the wind, the rain horizontal now, the landscape outside reduced to whatever the lightning chose to illuminate. She had her laptop open to a data collection program, inputs populating in real time from a device she had set on the windowsill before the full force hit. "Why are you here, alone?" she asked. Not accusatorially, with the directness of someone who asked questions because they needed information, not because they wanted to establish a position. "I live here, in this whole manor, alone, mostly." She wrote something in her notebook. He watched her do it and could not tell if she had written anything about him or if it was storm data, and found that he minded the uncertainty slightly, which was interesting. "I live alone too," she said, without looking up. "I find it easier." Easier than what? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then being around people who knew me before. She said it flatly, in the past tense that meant loss rather than change. "I moved 3 times in 2 years. I kept ending up in places where someone had a photograph of my sister at my birthday party, and I would walk into a kitchen and see it on the refrigerator and..." She stopped. "It's easier to be somewhere new." He did not offer condolences. He had received enough condolences in his long life to understand that they were primarily about the discomfort of the person offering them, and that what they displaced was the more difficult and useful thing: acknowledgement. "When did she die?" he asked. She looked at him then. Surprised, not by the question, he thought, but by the directness of it. 3 years ago. In a flood. She went very still. "How did you know that?" "You chase storms," he said. "You came to this valley in the middle of the night in this particular storm because the data interested you. You measure everything. You have a protocol for when to cross water and when not to, and you followed it tonight, even though crossing would have been faster." He paused. People who have lost something to a thing do not always run from it. Some run toward it. It depends on whether they want to understand it or escape it. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, something in the storm cracked. A branch, a tile, something substantial surrendering to the wind. She did not look at it. She was looking at him. "Which do you do?" she asked. He thought about the conclave, about Prest's unanswered calls, about 11 years in this valley, watching the water that he understood better than anything else, and still could not predict with certainty. "I watch," he said. "I accumulate information. I defer the conclusions." "That's the same as running," she said. "Just slower." He found he had no response to this that was both honest and comfortable. He did not offer a dishonest one. She turned back to the window. Prest arrived the following morning. This was not planned. Prest had driven from London overnight, which was not his usual behavior, and the fact that he had done so in the tail end of the worst storm the valley had seen in 40 years meant that the matter he had been calling about had reached a stage where delay was no longer possible. He found Nora at the desk in the study, asleep over her notebook, both cameras on the windowsill still collecting data, the storm reduced now to ordinary rain. He stood in the doorway and looked at her with the expression he wore when confronted with something he had not anticipated and had strong opinions about, then went to find Aldrich. "There is a human woman asleep in your study," he said. "I know. Using your desk. She needed somewhere to work." Prest looked at him with the look he had perfected over 30 years of managing Aldrich's affairs. The look that contained, simultaneously, loyalty and exasperation, and the specific patience of someone who had learned that direct opposition was less effective than strategic waiting. "The conclave," he said, "has issued a formal notice." Aldrich set down the book he was not reading. "Tell me, they have decided that the Velicourt estate is to be surrendered for collective use, as a gathering place." The vote was 8-3. Prest paused. "You were the abstaining third. by not voting. The room was very quiet. Outside, the ordinary rain continued. "They cannot compel me to surrender property," Aldrich said. "They can make your presence in this region untenable," Prest said. "You know what they can do. You have watched them do it to others." A pause. "They are sending a representative to assess the property within the fortnight." Aldrich thought about the manor, about the 11 years and the 60 years before, and the records in the cellar that went back further still, about the fault under the valley floor that made the water pool backwards, that he had known about for 2 centuries and had never told anyone because no one had asked in a way that warranted an answer. He thought about the woman in his study, asleep over her notebook, who had looked at him across a rain-streaked window and decided, with the efficient pragmatism of someone who had a protocol for everything, that he represented a roof and not a threat. "Leave the representative to me," he said. Prest's expression did not change. "She will be a problem." "The representative?" "The woman in your study." He said it without cruelty but without softness either. "The last time you allowed, I know," Aldrich said. "She died." "I know that too." A silence. The rain on the old windows. "She asked the right questions," Aldrich said, without knowing they were the right questions. Prest looked at him for a long moment. He had the manner of someone arranging a large number of concerns into an order of priority and finding that the order kept shifting. "I will stay through the fortnight," he said finally, "for the representative." "I know." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Prest said. "Make the right decisions for once." He left. Aldrich stood in the empty room and listened to the rain and thought about right decisions and how many of them he had made over a very long life and how few of them had felt, in the making, like anything other than the least bad option available. She stayed for 2 days. This was not what she had planned. She had planned to leave when the water dropped, cross the bridge, get back to the institute with her data. The water dropped enough on the second morning. She did not leave. She told herself it was the fault data. Aldrich had shown her the records in the cellar, handwritten logs in several different scripts, the oldest in a formal English that was not quite the English she knew, dates going back to 1743 and before that to records that were not dated, but described events she could cross-reference to historical accounts. The flood of 1799 that had taken the lower village. The flood of 1852 that had diverted the course of the eastern tributary. The fault, described in careful detail, with measurements that were more precise than anything the 19th century should have produced. "Who kept these records?" she asked, on her knees in the cellar with a torch and her field notebook. "Various people," Aldrich said. "Over time. This handwriting," she said, pointing to an entry from 1803, and this handwriting, pointing to an entry from 1891, are the same. He was quiet. She looked at him, over her shoulder. He was standing on the cellar stairs, as if maintaining the option of the above ground, and he was looking at her with the expression she had seen on him twice before. The expression of someone who has been caught at something they did not intend to hide. Exactly, but had not intended to show either. "How old are you?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that the question settled into the cellar air alongside the smell of old stone and older paper. "Old," he said. She turned back to the records. Wrote in her notebook, same handwriting 1803, 1891. Query. She added a question mark and moved on to the next entry because she had a protocol, and the protocol said, "Gather data, defer conclusions. Do not collapse the waveform before you have enough observations." But she had enough observations. She had had enough for most of the first day. What she did not have yet was certainty about what she intended to do with them. On the second evening, Prest made dinner with the thoroughness of someone determined to demonstrate normalcy, and they ate in the dining room that had not been used in some time, the 3 of them at one end of a table that could have seated 20. Nora asked Prest how long he had worked for Aldrich, and Prest said 30 years with the emphasis of someone communicating something to a third party, and Nora received this with the flat acknowledgement of someone who had already processed the implication. After dinner, Prest excused himself with pointed efficiency, and Nora and Aldrich sat with the remains of the wine and the candles that Prest had lit in an optimistic gesture toward ambience, and Nora said, "Tell me what you are. Not what I think you are. Not is it possible that. Tell me." He told her. Not everything, not the centuries of it, not the specific costs, but the essential architecture, what he was, what that meant in practical terms, what it did not mean that most people assumed it did. He told her the way you told someone information when you had decided, without quite deciding, to trust them, efficiently, without performance, watching to see what they did with it. She listened with her notebook closed. Her hands were flat on the table. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The last flood you recorded yourself, not someone else, was 1962. Yes, you watched it take the bridge. Yes, and the 1987 flood. Yes," she picked up her wine. "The fault data. Your measurements from 1803. Were they taken with the instruments available in 1803? No. What instruments did you use?" He looked at her. The candles between them made the kind of light that did not belong to any particular century. "Instruments I made, based on methods I had developed over the previous 50 years of watching the same water behave the same way." She nodded slowly. The nod of someone cross-referencing, not agreeing. That explains the precision. A pause. "I've been trying to model this valley's flood behavior for 3 years, and I couldn't get the models to fit because the data I had was insufficient. The publicly available data. The data that started in the 19th century with instruments that weren't precise enough." She looked at him. "You have 200 years of precise data. In the cellar, on the fault that makes the water pool backwards." "Yes." She was quiet again. The candles moved in some draft from the old building's old bones. "The conclave," she said. "The people who want your manor. Prest told me, this afternoon, while you were in the cellar. He didn't mean to tell me. I asked questions, and he answered them, because he didn't know what I knew yet." Aldrich looked at her. "What did he tell you? That the representative is coming in 10 days. That the conclave's interest in this property is not about the building, it's about the location. The elevation. The isolation." She paused. "That the last time someone challenged a conclave property decision, it went badly for them." "It did," he said. "What does badly mean in that context?" He considered how to answer this. "It means they are no longer in a position to challenge anything." The candles between them were very still now. The storm was entirely gone. The night outside was clear and cold. The valley visible in the dark as a deeper darkness. The water still high in the lower fields but dropping. "I have a conference in 3 weeks," Nora said. "At the Institute. I'm presenting flood modeling data for 6 river systems in the Northeast. I've been working on it for 8 months. She turned her wine glass in her hands. "If I had access to your records, the complete records, not just what I saw today, I could remodel this valley as a case study. The fault data alone would be significant. The 200-year data set would be..." She stopped. "It would be publishable in a way that would make this valley scientifically notable. It would attract attention from hydrological institutions, from universities. It would make the property..." She paused, choosing the word carefully. "Complicated to repurpose quietly." He looked at her for a long time. "You're proposing to make the manor inconvenient," he said. "I'm proposing to make it interesting to people who are better positioned than I am to make it inconvenient." She met his look without moving. "I'm a meteorologist. I publish data. That's what I do. You came here to chase a storm. I came here to understand water that doesn't follow the rules. It turns out I found more of that than I expected. Outside, the valley lay quiet under the cold, clear sky, the water in the lower fields reflecting stars, the fault deep beneath it all doing whatever faults did, holding, shifting, making the predictable unpredictable and the predictable true. He reached across the table. Not quickly, slowly, with the deliberateness of something that had learned to move carefully around things it did not want to damage. He set his hand on the table near hers, not touching, available. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Then she set her hand next to his, close enough that the edges of their fingers were touching, not a gesture, just a fact. The smallest possible confirmation of a decision that had been making itself for 2 days without their formal participation. The records, he said. You can have access to all of them. Good, she said. I'll need photographs. Of course you will. The conclave's representative arrived on a gray Thursday morning, driving a car that was aggressively appropriate for the terrain, and she was exactly what Aldrich had expected, old in the specific way of their kind that had nothing to do with appearance, carrying the certainty of someone who had not been refused in some time. Her name was Isolde, and she had known Aldrich for 140 years, and she disliked him with the specificity of long familiarity. She did not expect to find Nora. Nora was in the study when Isolde arrived, working at the desk with her laptop open and 3 printed maps spread beside it, annotated in red. She looked up when Isolde came to the doorway and said, "I'll be out of your way in a moment, I'm just finishing the fault section," and went back to her work. Isolde looked at her, then at Aldrich, who had appeared in the hallway behind her. "Who is this?" Isolde said. "Dr. Nora Vass," Aldrich said. "Meteorologist, Institute for Hydrological Research. She has been conducting a field study on this valley's flood patterns for the past week. She has been. The valley has a significant and previously undocumented geological feature," Nora said, without looking up. "A deep fault that affects drainage across the entire valley floor. The data I've collected here, combined with the historical records held in this property, constitutes the most comprehensive flood behavior dataset for this region in existence." She turned over a page. "I'm presenting a preliminary analysis at the International Hydrological Conference in 3 weeks. The full paper will be submitted to the Journal of Flood Risk Management in the spring." She finally looked up. The property has been formally registered as a research site with the Institute. Any significant changes to site access or structure would require notification to our research committee and to the university partners who have expressed interest in the dataset. Isolde looked at her with an expression that moved through several phases before settling on something that was not quite anger and not quite respect, and was possibly both. She looked at Aldrich. He said nothing. He had been saying nothing for 140 years, with a consistency that Isolde found deeply irritating. "I will need to report to the conclave," she said. "Of course," Aldrich said. "This doesn't resolve the matter." "No," he agreed. "It complicates it. Which is a different thing." Isolde left without seeing the cellar. She left without seeing most of the manor. She left with the expression of someone revising a plan that had seemed straightforward and now required additional steps, and Aldrich watched her car until it was gone from the valley road, and then went back inside. Nora was still at the desk. "Will she come back?" Nora asked. "Yes." He stood in the doorway. "But not soon. The conclave moves slowly when a situation has become complicated. It's one of their fewer virtues. How slowly? Months. Perhaps longer." He paused. "It won't hold indefinitely." "No," she said. "But 3 months is enough to get the paper submitted. Once it's under review, the institutional interest becomes harder to sidestep." She looked at the maps. and the fault data is genuinely significant. It's not a strategy. It's real. The paper will be good. I know, he said. That's why I gave you the records. She looked at him over the top of her laptop. Not to save the Manor? To give you the data you've been trying to get for 3 years. He moved into the room and sat in the chair across from her, the one that had not been sat in by anyone else in some time. The Manor is a secondary benefit. She studied him for a moment. Outside, the valley was quiet in the gray morning light, the water still high but no longer rising, the fault beneath it doing its quiet work. Petra would have liked this place, she said. It came out without warning, the way true things sometimes did. Not planned, not managed, just suddenly present. She did not try to take it back. She liked old things. She liked places that had been somewhere for a long time. A pause. She would have asked you approximately 40 questions by now. What kind of questions? The personal kind. She was not. Nora stopped. She didn't have protocols. She just asked. Something moved in her face that she let move, which was different from her usual practice. I've been building protocols for 3 years. To make sure I don't miss anything. To make sure I understand the variables before I cross. She looked at the window, the gray light, the valley. She didn't know the variables. That's not why she died. She died because the water was faster than it looked. She swallowed. I know that. I've known it for a while. But knowing it and being done with it, Aldrich said. Yes. The room held this for a moment. He did not move toward her. He did not offer anything. He stayed in the chair across from her and let the silence be what it was. Not empty, not a gap to be filled, but a kind of presence. After a while, she turned back to her laptop. I need to finish the fault section today if I'm going to hit the conference deadline. I'll have Prest bring lunch, he said. That would be good, she said. Thank you. She left on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the storm. The valley road was clear. The fields had drained in the slow way of valleys with unusual fault geology, the water retreating according to patterns that Nora had now modeled with a precision that satisfied her in the specific way that correct models were satisfying. Not triumph. Just the quiet confirmation that the world was consistent if you looked at it long enough and carefully enough. Prest loaded her equipment into her car with the efficiency of someone who had learned to manage departures. He did not say anything significant. He shook her hand. Aldrich came to the door. She had her go bag over one shoulder and her case with the cameras in her right hand, and she stood on the front steps and looked at him. The paper, she said. I'll send you a copy when it's accepted. I'd like that. The seller records should be digitized, properly, before they degrade further. I know. I've been meaning to. He stopped. For 50 years? She said. Approximately. She looked at the valley. The morning was clear and cold, the fields still damp, the distant low point where the bridge was visible as a thin gray line over water that was nearly normal. I'll come back, she said. It was not a question or a promise. Exactly. More a statement of probability. A model output. The most likely result given the available data. I'll be here, he said. In the way of something that had been here for a very long time and had every intention of continuing. She went down the steps and put her equipment in the car. She drove down the valley road without looking in the mirror, which was not discipline but choice. She had looked at the Manor enough to know what she was leaving, and enough to know she was coming back, and the mirror would only show her what she already knew. The bridge held. On the seat beside her, her notebook was open to the last page she had written, last night, in the particular stillness of the old house, after Prest had gone to bed. She had written, fault runs N East W, surface expression at lower field margin, behavior anomalous under high water table. She had written, record 1743 present, comprehensive, unique, irreplaceable. She had written, At the bottom of the page in different handwriting from the rest, looser, less deliberate. The handwriting of something written without protocol. Same handwriting, 1803, 1891, 1962. Not a question anymore. The road north was clear. The sky was the particular gray of a cleared system, washed, empty, waiting for what came next. She drove into it. The conference was in Boston. She presented the fault data on a Thursday afternoon to a room of 112 people, and she could see, in the specific way that you could see it when a room recognized significance, that it landed the way she had thought it would. The questions afterward were the right questions. The department head from MIT stayed afterward and asked about site access. She said she would be in touch. She called Aldrich from the hotel room that night. He picked up on the second ring, which she had not expected. Had expected to leave a message. Had prepared a message, and the sound of his voice, with its slight cadence wrongness, made the hotel room feel less generic than it had. "The conference went well," she said. "I know," he said. "I watched the program online. Your abstract was well written." She had not told him she was presenting. "How did you find the program?" "Pressed," he said. "He is considerably better with technology than I am. The MIT hydrology department wants site access. I expected that. I told them I'd be in touch." "Yes," he said. And then, after a pause, "When are you coming back?" She looked out the hotel window at the Boston skyline, the Charles River visible as a dark ribbon between the buildings. Water, running according to its own rules, following its own fault lines, pooling in the places that gravity and geology determined, regardless of what the models predicted. "Next week," she said. "I have data to collect." "Of course," he said. "The storm season isn't over." "No," she said. "It isn't." Outside her window, the river ran on. In the Velicourt Valley, 300 miles north, the water in the lower fields was doing whatever it did, finding the fault, following the logic of deep old stone, pooling in the southwest when all the surface evidence said northeast. Doing the thing it had always done. Patient, consistent, wrong in exactly the way it had always been wrong, which meant it was right in a way that took centuries to understand. She had time. She was already learning to think in longer spans. The second visit was in October. She had not planned to stay more than a weekend, had a data collection objective, specific measurements she wanted to take from the fault expression point in the lower field before the autumn rains changed the water table. Prest met her at the door with the manner of someone who had been expecting her and had opinions about that fact, and showed her to the study where her equipment from the first visit was still arranged on the windowsill because no one had moved it. Aldrich appeared at dusk, which she had begun to understand was his version of a morning arrival, the hour when he came into the day rather than out of it. He stood in the study doorway and looked at her with the expression she had catalogued and cross-referenced and still found, each time, slightly more than she had prepared for. "The fault expression has shifted," she said. "Southward. About 3 meters. Since when?" "Since August, based on the historical records. I found a note in the 1908 log. It was trending then, too." She turned the notebook to show him. "It moves. Slowly. But it moves." He came to look at the notebook, standing beside her, not close enough to be a statement, close enough to be a fact. She could see his hands on the desk surface, pale, steady, the hands of someone who had written in several different scripts across 2 centuries of meticulous record-keeping. "The 1908 note," he said. "I wrote that." "I know." He looked at her. She looked at the notebook. "How long does a fault shift take?" she asked. "In your experience?" "This one has been moving since before I arrived here. It moved faster in the 18th century. It slowed in the 19th. He paused. "I don't know what determines the rate. Neither do I yet. She wrote something. But I will." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more the movement preceding one, arrested at the same point where his smiles arrested, not from repression, but from disuse, from being out of practice at things that required the body to commit to an expression. "What?" she said. "You said that the way someone says they will understand a thing that has been going on for 400 years, 312, based on your records." She looked up. "Unless there are earlier records." "There are earlier records." She closed her notebook, opened it again, wrote, "Earlier records, pre-1743, query access." Looked at him. "Can I see them?" He held her look for a moment. The study was warm. She had learned that Aldrich ran warmer rooms when she was in them, had noticed this on the second day of the first visit, and filed it without comment. Outside, the October Valley was doing what October Valleys did, going amber and copper, and then going dark early, the hills visible as darker shapes against a sky that had not quite decided to be night. "Yes," he said. After dinner, she had been staying for dinner since the third day of the first visit. Prest cooked with the focused competence of someone who had learned that useful skills outlasted most other things, and ate with them at the long table as a matter of course. And the three of them had developed a conversational rhythm that had nothing to do with what any of them had expected when the storm had brought her to the window 3 months before. After dinner, in the cellar, he showed her boxes she had not seen. Older wood, the brass fittings gone green, the contents wrapped in linen rather than modern archival materials. She knelt on the cellar floor and unwrapped the first document with the care of someone who had learned conservation practices early and followed them the way she followed all her protocols, without exception. The date on the first page was 1698. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she looked at him, standing on the stairs with the lamp, watching her. "You were here in 1698, she said. "I arrived in 1691. What brought you here?" He was quiet for a moment. The cellar held its particular cold. The water smell of old stone and the particular atmosphere of things kept carefully in the dark for a very long time. "I was looking for somewhere that would still be here," he said, "when other things changed." A pause. "Most places don't persist. They change enough that the thing you return to isn't the thing you left." This valley, he looked toward the ceiling, the direction of the surface, the water-damaged fields. This valley is always this valley. The water always finds the fault. The fault always moves slowly south. It changes, but it changes the same way, consistently, and that is a kind of permanence. She looked at the document in her hands. The handwriting on it was older than what she had seen before, more formal, the letters of a script that had been more careful in 1698 than it became by 1803. But it was his handwriting. She knew it now the way she knew the valley's topography, not memorized, but understood. "You came here to stay still," she said. "I came here to have something to watch that didn't change." He paused. "I had been in too many places that changed too fast." She set the document down gently on the linen and looked at her hands. The cellar lamp threw their shadows long against the stone walls. "I came here because the water doesn't follow the models," she said. "Because I needed something that had a logic I didn't understand yet, something I couldn't predict." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been trying to understand everything for 3 years, so I couldn't be surprised by it. Has it worked?" She looked up at him. "No," she said. "Things keep being surprising." He came down the stairs, not all the way, just far enough that the lamp he held was between them rather than above him. The cellar light was honest in the way that light was honest when it had no agenda, and in it he looked exactly what he was, very old and present, and watching her with the attention of something that had decided it was not going anywhere. She had protocols for most things. She did not have a protocol for this. She reached up and took the lamp from his hand, set it on the floor beside the archival boxes. Stood. He was still on the stairs, one step above her, which made them nearly the same height. She looked at him. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued 40 times and never quite finished classifying. You said, she said, that you came here to have something to watch. That didn't change. A pause. I change. Yes, he said. That's what makes it different. She thought about Petra, who had not had protocols, who had asked personal questions without preparation, who had driven into water because she had not known how to measure it and had not known to ask. She thought about 3 years of protocols, about the go bag by the door and the labeled Ziploc bags and the protein bar she always forgot to eat, about the valley in August, about the way the water pooled southwest when everything said northeast, patient and consistent and wrong in the way that turned out to be its own kind of right. She stepped up onto the stair. He reached for her, slowly, pausing at her jaw. One hand, the pause asking the question that he had the patience of centuries to wait for the answer to. She did not give refusal. The cellar was cold, and the lamp on the floor threw their shadows up the stone walls, and outside the valley did what it had always done, holding its fault, following its water, persisting in the particular way of things that have no interest in changing because they have already found the form that fits them. Later, much later, she sat on the cellar stairs with his coat around her shoulders and the 1698 document on her lap, reading it with the lamp held close, and he sat beside her watching her read, and neither of them was talking, which was its own language by then. The fault in 1698, she said finally. Where was the expression point? Northwest corner of the lower field, he said, near the old wall. She wrote it in her notebook. 300 years of southward drift. She calculated. About a meter per decade. Approximately. She looked at the numbers, at the long, slow movement of something massive and geological, patient beyond any human reckoning, going where it was going at the pace it had always gone. If the rate holds, she said, in another 200 years it'll be at the road. Yes, he said. Will you be here? He looked at her. I expect so. She looked back at the numbers. Wrote, projected fault expression 2220, road margin. Then, below it, smaller, check. The lamp threw warm light on the old stone walls, on the documents that had been kept here for 3 centuries, on her handwriting next to his in the margins of things that had been waiting to be understood. Outside, the October night settled over the valley, the water in the lower fields quiet, the fault beneath it doing what it had always done, shifting, slowly, in the direction it had always been going, patient and consistent and right in a way that required a very long view to see. She would develop the long view. She had time, and the right teacher, and a notebook with enough pages.